Well, hello and welcome to this Portugal Calling webinar from Expats Portugal. We're looking at importing vehicles to Portugal this evening in the company and under the expert guidance of Rosanna Veglia from Global International Relocation. Hello, Rosanna, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Carl. How are you guys? I'm doing really good, really excited to be here tonight, sharing a little bit of knowledge.
Thank you for being here, Chief Mobility Officer over
at that sounds so
GIR. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So that everybody knows, let's all get on the same page with what we're covering tonight. We'll be looking at some of the benefits, processes, and costs, including the big question, is it worth bringing your vehicle to Portugal? The requirements for tax exemption and how to apply, and looking at those taxes and duties and how to calculate them. What to do if your vehicle is in Portugal already, how do you proceed from there? Decoding acronyms like DAV and COC tonight. What is the vehicle import certificate? What is the registration certificate? What steps are involved in your legalization? Another abbreviation, IMT, dealing with customs, the vehicle registration itself, inspection 2, and the tips from Rosanna about legalizing your vehicle for roadworthiness and use here in Portugal. And the question of European vehicles versus non-European vehicles, because there's a little bit of a difference. So let's start, Rosanna, by finding out a little bit about you, speaking for the first time in an Expats Portugal webinar. Chief Mobility Officer, tell us what you do over at GIR, and if you will, tell us a little bit about the company as well.
All right, so the Chief Mobility Officer, it just makes me feel really bad every time somebody says it. Right. It used to be Relocation and Immigration Director before.
Oh, okay.
To give a little bit of background, Global, it's a company that handles everything that has to do with moving to Portugal. We do internally household good moves. I think you've had already Luis with you speaking a little bit about shipping your goods to Portugal. We do car imports as well. We assist with the relocation part of it, which is, helping people finding a house and getting settled in Portugal, registrations. And we also have a team of lawyers that do immigration. So what we do and the team that I run does, we get hand in hand with expats. A lot of them come from companies that are going to work in Portugal. Some of them are coming under D7 visas as well. And we help them find their housing, with their immigration, and with the process of legalizing their car, which is what we're going to talk today. It's funny because with the acronyms, seems like it's a very difficult process, which is not, but it's just very long and bureaucratic. So I just want to save people a lot of time here, giving some information that I think is valuable.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And rapid growth for GIR. I think you started with them some time ago when they're a family firm, and growing rapidly to meet the needs of people coming to Portugal.
Yeah, that's where the Chief Mobility Officer comes. We were speaking a little bit a while. I've been in GIR for about 8 years now. So when I entered the company, we were roughly about 15, 20 people. We're now over 100 with 3 offices in Porto, the Algarve, and in Lisbon. And so we are in the process of becoming more than a family-owned company, just a real, big company. So I think that's where the names come from at the moment.
And that's where you are, the CMO who we're speaking to tonight. And we have indeed spoken to Luis before now. He's great fun to talk to. And other colleagues, because you also move pets, don't you, to Portugal?
We do. We do pet relocation and art as well. We transport art. So you name it, we do it.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get into that first question. And please, if you didn't hear me detailing something you're interested in, those of you who are in the audience, do put the question in the chat, and I'll make sure it gets to Rosanna. Dwight is in from New Mexico. Erica, sunny Southern California this evening, or this afternoon for you. Evening all from Robert. And hello from Southeast Virginia. Hi, Mike. Botard from Coimbra in Portugal. Somebody who's already here. Botard from Castanheira de Pera, also already here in Portugal. Cascais, who would that be? Oh, it's Anna. Hello, Anna. And greetings from Cape Town, where David is this evening. And the Netherlands, represented by George tonight. Okay. Is it worth it? I mean, we can shorthand this sometimes. People who've been through this process, oh no, I would never do that again, or it's so expensive, it's so difficult. Is it worth bringing your vehicle to Portugal? Roughly speaking, how do you address that question, Rosanna?
I mean, short answer, I think it depends, but mostly yes, especially if you're bringing your car from outside of the EU. And if you do qualify for tax exemption, then we're going to get into it briefly. And the reason is, cars in Portugal are very expensive because of tax reasons. So probably, a car that you bought for, say, $15,000-$20,000 in the US, if you wanted to get a car from the same brand and the same year here in Portugal, it would probably cost you maybe 30% more than that, to 50% more than that. So if you want to keep your car and you're in love with it and it's part of, your precious things, then yes, it's worth it. You need to be very patient. And one of the things we like to tell our clients is understand bureaucracy in Portugal. It's very slow moving sometimes, but that's why we are there. And we just hold the hand of the people that we work with in order for them to have not to worry about that process.
Right, so those two features, thank you. Those two features are well worth bearing in mind. Then, if you're sentimentally attached, to some people are to their vehicles. For some people, it's a matter of getting from A to B, isn't it? And for others, it's it's their best friend in life. Sometimes their vehicle.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Well, and then we have people who bring collectibles or cars are antiques and things like that. So yeah.
And of course, the big difference in price in buying cars that you mentioned in Portugal as well. So that can make it worth it on a cost benefit analysis when you add up all the costs. And I think we have got somebody who's quite attached to their vehicle, giving us the specifics. We'll come back to that, Mike. Thank you very much. So yes, taxes. There's some exemptions. So that's a really good place to start, isn't it? Who is exempt from these taxes that people obviously don't want to be paying unless they absolutely have to? Yeah.
So for someone who's considering bringing their car to Portugal, there are two things that you need to keep in mind in order to actually have tax exemption. The first one is that you need to have lived in the country of origin where the car is registered for at least 6 months before you cancel your residence there and come to Portugal, right? And you've had to own the car for at least 6 months before you cancel your residency there and decide to come to Portugal. So those are the two main things. And then I'll explain a little bit how you prove that information, but that's the one thing you need to keep in mind. So if you just bought the car, or if you had it on a lease or on a credit with a bank and you just changed the car to your name, you'll have to wait for 6 months before you actually can bring the car here.
And that's the way, I suppose, for the Portuguese government to make sure you're not importing it as a business.
Exactly, for business purposes,
Yeah, okay, all right. And not to be making a profit on that. It's actually your own vehicle, and that's quite a good way of shorthanding that. Okay, excellent, thank you. What next?
So what next? So when you say not living in the origin country the 6 months prior canceling the residency, that means not having a resident tax here in Portugal, your NIF as a resident here for that period of time. Then the next part of the process is, how do you prove that? How do you cancel your residency in your origin country, and what's the document that you need for that? And that's the car import certificate. So it's a very important document that you need to get before you move to Portugal. And it's done at the Portuguese consulate in the country where you're applying for visa, or in the case of the US, that we have a lot of clients that come from the US, could be in the consulate in Washington, San Francisco, or New York. And that document specifically has to say that you are moving your primary residency from the US or from, imagine, any other country that you're coming to Portugal with a specific date, okay? They will ask you for proof of documentation that you actually lived in that country for that long. Normally, that proof of documentation would be, utility bills or pay slips because of the job that you had. Anything that proves your everyday living in that country for those 6 months prior. Once you have that document, then you can travel to Portugal. Obviously, you have to have your visa already approved. So you have to have an address, a house where you come here and live in Portugal. You then have to have your NIF registered as a resident at that time, the time that you arrive in Portugal. And that's the information that shows that you just moved and are a resident in Portugal. Did I explain myself clearly on that one?
Yeah, I think you did. And if anyone's unclear, they'll ask us and we can clarify. So is it right then, if you satisfy those criteria, you will not have import duty to pay on the vehicle because you have proved it's your vehicle?
Exactly. So you'll only have to pay the shipping cost of the car.
Yes.
And then once you arrive here, because there are two processes, the custom clearance process of the car, where you'll need to prove all those documents. The basic documents are the car import certificate, the tax residency number here, and your visa. And also the local resident certificate, the one that you get at the town hall.
Mm-hmm.
So those 4 documents will prove that you actually can apply for a tax exemption. And once your car is cleared from customs, then the legalization process can start. And you'll have to prove again with those documents that you don't have to pay the tax, which is called the ISV.
Yeah.
And you'll be exempt from that.
Great. Is this the right time to go into those shipping costs then? Because that's all well and good, isn't it? And presumably you're, as you say, you're hand-holding people to get all of those pieces of paperwork and those documental ducks in a row. And then they're in a position not to have to pay the tax, but they will have to pay the shipping costs. Can you give us some ballpark figures for that?
It actually depends of the origin country and the type of move that you're doing. Actually, I'm not very familiar with the shipping costs because it will always depend on the origin agent in the country of origin and how much
Well, so there are so many variables in that. It's best
there
to
are a lot of variables. Yes.
Get a quote directly from GIR then and speak
exactly.
to.
I'll leave my email, and then if you guys need some of that information, you can ask, and I'll pass it on to Luis.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Excellent stuff. That's good to know. All right. So that's fairly straightforward then. That's how to get a vehicle here tax exempt. Do you want to give any sort of case studies of how well that goes, and what happens if it doesn't go that well? People do sometimes presumably face a little bit of import duty.
Yes. So there are cases where having the exemption is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
For example, someone who moved here over 12 months ago, and now they decided they wanted to bring their car, but they're already a resident in Portugal, and they've had their tax number as a resident for more than 6 months. They're not going to be eligible for tax exemption. So the way you calculate that, it's based on, first you have to pay taxes and VAT on the cost of importing your car here, the shipping cost, which is calculated, I think is the 23% VAT, and then plus the 10% of the shipping cost. Those are the costs you have to pay when the car is being cleared from customs. And then when the legalization process starts, then you'll have to pay the ASV, which is calculated based on, CO2 emissions, the year of the car, whether it's gasoline or diesel. And some cars, maybe sometimes it's worth paying that cost, those taxes, because getting that car here is going to be expensive. But normally, if the car is coming from outside of the EU, it's going to be really expensive. So that's when it's really important to have a very good idea of the cost, everything included, the shipping, the VAT and the percentage you have to pay, the duties you have to pay, plus ASIV, because sometimes it's not worth it bringing the car. And It's better to buy something here.
And that's when it suddenly seems really unattractive to bring your car to Portugal, when you've lost those tax-free benefits or tax exemption benefits.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. So perhaps now the time is to talk about what happens if your vehicle is in Portugal, those who've driven here. Before we do, Mike says, I own a 2009 Ford Ranger pickup. You see, when someone refers to their vehicle in this way, I think they're quite attached and they love their vehicle and they want to see it here. Similar to the Mazda B series small truck, and I can see that pickup driving through the country roads of Portugal. Mike, need to know if it makes sense to export it to Portugal. I own it outright, only 88,000 on the clock, and bringing it will allow us to have transportation sooner. So true if you've got your own vehicle. But I mean, Mike sounds like he may well qualify for all the things you've said there as somebody new to the country and having owned the vehicle since 2009. So
where is the car coming from?
I'm guessing from the United States, but let us know, Mike. And of course, when we finish the recording, you can ask questions yourself as well. Another Carl here tonight. Is it silly or just unrealistic to think about bringing 2 cars to Portugal? Well, so yeah, it depends. Right.
That's actually a really good question, because each person is entitled to bring 1 car under the tax exemption benefit. However, if you're coming with your partner, you're married, even if both cars have been on your name, you can always register here in Portugal one of the cars on the name of your partner, and then it will be exempted of tax because it will be, registered to another individual. The process is similar. You'll have to own the car for more than 6 months, but you don't have to move the title of the car on the name of your wife. You only have to sign a letter, that we will provide saying that you're passing over that car to your wife here, and then we'll do the legalization on her name, and then the tax will be exempted.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
glad. So good you asked that, Carl. That's great. So one car each, one car per person, but in a relationship of two people, you'll obviously have two
They
cars.
have to be married. They have to have a marriage certificate because of
Okay, marriage
the
certificate.
documentation we need to have. Yeah.
Okay, so not cohabitation proof, but actually a marriage certificate. By the sound of it there. Okay, thank you for that. Let's go to Deborah and Ian. What if you've already driven your car over to Portugal? So that takes us to into the world of acronyms, doesn't it? DAV and COC and that sort of thing. So what does happen if you've already brought it here?
So just if you already wrote the car, and if the car comes from another European country, you have to actually get a document from your origin country saying that you canceled your residency. In that case, it doesn't have to be from the Portuguese consulate. You can go to your town halls, your local town hall. For example, in Spain, I think it's called local parish registration. And I'm pretty sure in Europe, there's something that's similar in every country. Mm-hmm. And you have to just say that you're canceling your residency in that address and then moving it to Portugal, and that document will be valid. If the car was driven from a country outside of the EU, imagine you brought it from the UK, came through a ferry, then you drove from Spain to Portugal or something like that, it needs to be custom cleared before the legalization process has to start. So you have to liaise with a forwarder from customs, provide the documentation that proves that you're actually eligible for tax exemption or not, depending, the conditions, and then have the document of custom clearance so we can start the process.
Okay, excellent. And have you already talked about the DAV there in that list?
Yeah, no, the DAV, so just to get a little bit more into detail into how the process of legalization works, because one of the biggest worries that everybody has is whether they're able to drive the car while it's being legalized. And just to give you some context, the process takes a while. To actually get a Portuguese plate number, it probably takes 4 to 6 months from the moment you initiate the process until you actually are able to register your car here. And you don't want to have your car just parked in a garage and not be able to drive it for all that time. So the DAV document, it's the document from customs that you first introduce when you start in the legalization process. For that, we need to present to customs after the car has been cleared from the shipping process. We have to present to customs the fact that you own that car and all the proof of documentation that you are eligible for tax exemption, and prove that the car is yours and everything else, and they will issue that document called the DAV. Right. That document, it will say that in the first stage of the process, will say invalidation, that it's being validated. But with that document, as long as your car entered Portugal with your original license plates from the origin country, and as long as you buy, temporary insurance in Portugal, you can actually drive the car while it's being legalized.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's something that not everybody knows that it can be done. Normally, any forwarder that will help you with the legalization of your car will not give you the DAV document, so you will have to have the car stop. And we know that it works, and that's the first thing that we do for our clients to make sure that they can drive and they don't have to worry for 4 months, while the process is actually undergoing all the steps that they need to go.
So the DAV is basically saying the process has started and I continue to use the vehicle while the process is ongoing. Sorry, I interrupted you there. Go on.
No, it is exactly that. And that document will be upgrading itself as long as we go through the steps of the legalization process. And the last part of the process, whenever you have that DAV, the final document, is the one that's actually going to give you the new license plate of the car. So in one of the lines, at the end, it's going to say, this was the old plate and now this is the new number. So that's a document that will serve us next to actually get the plates printed and install in the car and actually do the process of registration. But maybe if you want me to, I can go and explain a little bit what the steps of the process are, because there are several government offices that are involved.
Yeah, let's do that. If I could rewind or reverse in this scenario a little bit, because Robert asked the question, sorry if I missed this, can I bring my car from UK for 6 months with no paperwork required? So how long have people got driving around in their own vehicle before they think of doing this process?
So as long as you're not a resident in Portugal, you can actually drive your car for 180 days with your license plates without having to do any legalization. And that really doesn't matter where the car comes from. But as long as you're not a resident in Portugal, once you become a resident in Portugal, you have 60 days to initiate the process of legalization if you're not going to have tax exemption. Because if you are going to have tax exemption, then you have up to 12 months to initiate the process. It's just quite tricky, the dates. You need to have them in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess they have
You
to
cannot drive it. You cannot drive it unless you initiate the process. So you have that 60-day window to initiate it while you can drive it.
And if you were coming from the UK, you weren't on a visa, you'd only have 90 days anyway, wouldn't you? To before you.
Well, yeah, legally for the visa purposes, you only have 90 days to be here.
Okay, all right, all those numbers. They got to draw the line somewhere, and it's the mental arithmetic of all those numbers there. Okay, so let's go back to some of those other parts of the jigsaw then, when it comes to legalizing your vehicle for Portugal, which the technical term is matriculation, is it not?
Exactly, that's it.
Right. Yeah. All right, so tell us about that. What all of these acronyms, abbreviations, and processes involved?
just to give you, we already know what the DAV is. And then the COC, it's the certificate of conformity of the car. So for a car that is coming from a European country, so certificate of conformity is basically what we call an homologation. It's a document that says that the car in question has been valid within the European space. And normally a car that comes from a European country already has that certificate. You can request it and you'll get it within, probably a week or two, and you can request it online. And that document, it's enough proof for homologation. But when the car is coming from outside of the European country, we don't have that certificate. Even though the car might have it from the fabric in the US, it's not homologated to Europe. So we need to do something that it's similar. So that the way that we do it is, there's a document that we put through the MIT, which is the transport ministry here in Portugal, is the EMT, that is signed and stamped by the brand, that allows them to search for a similar car that's already been legalized here in Portugal and take that homologation number and run with it for this car. I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but basically what it says is, listen, your car came from the US. There's no a certificate of conformity because it doesn't come from the European space, but we've already legalized several cars coming from the US with these same characteristics, and we know that it complies. So here's the number, you can go ahead and continue with your process. However, when the car comes from outside of the EU, that part of the process takes a while, probably takes about 2 to 3 months. While we get the certification from the brand and we introduce the documents to the traffic authorities, and they actually give us that number of homologation. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I'm learning new words. We've got matriculation, which might be new for some people, and homologation as well tonight. Write that down, everybody. Wow. Okay. Yeah, we're up to speed on that.
Yeah.
I'll use as many vehicular analogies as I can. So yes, we're up to speed. Please proceed.
All right. So after we obtain that document, and if your car comes from Europe, you can actually give it to us. Then the next step will be to actually conduct an inspection for the car. So that inspection, there's an annual inspection that cars have to undergo here in Portugal if they're older than 4 years old. They have to do it yearly. This inspection is a little bit more thorough. It's called the Type B inspection, and what they say is, we're going to review this car, make sure that it complies with the Portuguese law and with the European traffic law. And so when the car comes from outside of the EU space, we need that homologation number to be issued before, in order for us to actually be able to schedule that inspection. What we recommend is, as soon as the car arrives in Portugal, to bring it to one of the inspection centers to do a pre-inspection. We coordinate all that. If we're actually doing the service for the client, we coordinate all that so clients don't have to worry about that. But it's good to have a pre-inspector, because they will give you a report and say, look, you'll have to change, your sparkling lights, for example, because the US one, the color, it's red, and in Portugal they have to be orange, and they get that to that very small detail, and it needs to be changed. You'll actually have to change your kilometer, your counting from miles to kilometers, or you have to remove any sort of paper that you might have on the windows to make it darker, because it can't have any, or if it has some, it has to be with an homologation number from Europe, for example. So that we give you all those specific details that you need to change in order to pass that inspection. So it's worth it to have a pre-inspection. Normally, it's just very, very basic things that you need to change, and you can do that in any shop, but it will save you a lot of time and headaches if you get it before.
On that note, Rosanna, there are a lot of these inspection centres around Portugal, because that might be a question, mightn't it? I mean, am I going to have to be driving to Lisbon? These inspection centres seem to be everywhere all over Portugal.
They are, yeah. There are many inspection centres, but you need to be aware of one thing. Right. This type of inspection, especially for cars that they don't have a COC, their CO2 emissions need to be measured, and not every inspection center have that machine. Okay. Yeah. So whenever you're scheduling an inspection, you need to make sure that they have that machine and that they can actually do that measurement for the car.
Okay, thank you.
And a big tip and a big advice is, right before you take your car to measure the CO2, just do a service on the car, change their oil and all of that. So you don't want very high emissions, because otherwise your yearly taxes are going to be higher.
Yeah. Well, often there's a service station next door to an inspection center. They seem to gather together, don't they? The mechanics.
It's very convenient, isn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So yeah, that's a part of the inspection, the process of inspection. Once we already have that document, then all the original documents from the car, so the car title, the registration, the car import certificate, everything that, there's a long list of documents, but these are the ones that are more important. We need to submit that original documents to the MIT, which is the National Institute of Transport in Portugal, because they need to process all the documentation and actually issue a new homologation number for the car.
Right. Okay. And that's, for the sake of people having a reference point, is what you would have as the DMV in the United States, or the DVLA.
Yes.
In the UK. It's the same sort of mirror authority, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay. What else are people up against? I don't know how far you are through this process now.
Well, that process is ongoing at the Transfer Institute. We have another thing that is simultaneously happening, which is in customs, which is the part of the reviewing of the documentation to make sure that you're actually eligible for tax exemption.
Right.
So what they will ask you, apart from the regular documentation that proves that that you own the car, the car enter when you actually establish your residency in Portugal, and everything that we already discussed before, you need to again submit to them proof of everyday living in your origin country for at least 6 months. So we always tell people, prepare electricity bills, bank statements, anything that says, this person actually lived here, because they get really into the detail. For example, if you give me a bank statement that have a few movements every month, they don't take it as an everyday proof of living. Nobody lives in a country where they use their car once or twice a month, right? Okay. So it has to prove that you actually had everyday living in there. So we submit those documents and they go through a review, and then they say, yeah, tax exemption is granted. And so when that happens, that DAV document that we've been using to happily drive our car while this whole thing is happening, and you don't have to know that it's happening, they will issue the final document with the license plate, which is happy days for us. Absolutely. And for our clients.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because at that point, maybe 4 months, 5 months already went by. So yeah, it's a good moment in the process. Then what we do is that we schedule, for the plates to be printed and installed. But however, even though you have a plate, a matriculation process in Portugal already went ahead, the car still isn't registered. So at that point, then customs communicates to the Transport Institute that the car already has plates. And then we have to wait 6 weeks for those plate numbers to be input into their system, so we can actually register the car, which is done at the registry. So there's a lot of parties involved throughout the process. But that's the final point in the process. Once the car has been registered at the registry, in a matter of a week or two, you receive the new title of the car in your house, which is a little car.
It is. I was going to say, it's like so many things in Portugal. It's one of those little plastic credit-sized cards, isn't it, with your matriculation details?
Now it used to be a really long, big paper that nobody ever knew where to put it, but now it's a little card.
It's a card in the wallet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, that's great. We're coming up towards the end of the recording part, and I think we've included a lot of what people need to know, the basics, and we'll go to specific questions after the recording. But I don't want to deprive you of any more time for the basics and important things that people need to know, Rosanna. So what else I mean, you've covered quite a few tips there, getting the service before you put it through its inspection. Is there anything else people might like to know in that process?
Depends. Sometimes when the car comes from a European country, it's good to verify how much tax you will have to pay on it, because sometimes it's not very high, and it saves you all of the hassle of the process that I just explained. You still have to go through an inspection, and still, the car has to be registered at the traffic authorities, but the whole customs part and tax exemption paperwork, it's dismissed. You don't need it. And you actually don't have to be a resident in Portugal. You can, not be a resident in Portugal and register a car here under your name, paying taxes. So that's just the tip. It's always good. So what we do is, whenever someone is interested, we ask them for the car title, and we just run the numbers for them and let them decide what the best part of the process will be. Cars outside from the US, from the European space, yes, definitely. You need to aim for the tax exemption.
Okay. And somebody might be saying, well, if I come to move to Portugal and I can move freely to Germany, for example, or Spain, why can't I just go and buy a car there and bring it back? Well, you can, can't you? But you're up against you can do it, but you'll be up against similar processes.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it. You can buy the car, you can legalize it here, but you'll have to pay the tax.
You have to pay the tax, and you'll have to go through the process, which is not as arduous possibly as some. So Mike was saying, coming from the USA to come back to Mike, Port of Norfolk, or maybe to arrange the transport. I've been in shipping for over 40 years. However, having heard a bit more, okay, so it sounds like I'll be letting GIR take care of the move, lol.
Amazing.
Thanks, Mike, for that. And I think Mike, I don't know if it's the same Mike, somebody's asking about changes to the vehicle, like, bigger tires. Those are the sorts of things that cause the conformity problems, aren't they? If you've done a lot of modifications on your vehicle, that's where you might run into some unnecessary problems.
That's it, because every change that you do to the car that it doesn't have an original part, it needs to be homologated. So if you did any of those changes here in Europe, for example, there will be an homologation number. And so we'll have to have that original document with the homologation submitted to the MIT and make sure that they approve it. It will take longer to get the car legalized, but it's possible. However, if you did those modifications in a country outside of the EU, that's when it becomes complicated. There's the possibility to find homologation, but you have to go and do it for every little piece that you change. It's probably not worth it.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound arduous, doesn't it? Okay, I'll give you the last word, obviously, on the recording, but there's just a couple of things that I think are quite important about classics and kit cars and so on. Michael owns a 1967 Fiat Dino. It sounds great, that I'm currently restoring from the ground up. It will not be complete when we arrive in Portugal later this year. I have all the parts in boxes. Is it possible to import this? So what happens when you bring a car in pieces?
That's a good question. I probably don't have the answer to.
No, I mean, it's not really a car, is it? It's just a bunch of bits. So what happens?
Actually, I have to be really honest. I don't know if it's possible to register as a car if it comes in pieces, but I'm pretty sure there's a way around it, and our Prolio shipping team knows better than me. So I'd be happy to ask them that question and get back to you. However, for classic cars, there is benefits. I don't have the specific dates in here. I'll have to get into the site because there's a very specific dates and information. But if the car is over 20, I think it's over 20 years older, it's exempt from paying the taxes, which is a great, it's a great opportunity. Right. I can, probably share some of that information with the person that is interested. But yes, it's a 47-year-old motorcycle, was it?
It was, yes, that was a question specifically about a 47-year-old motorcycle, which does sound like a classic. But yes, there are tax exemptions on some classics. And obviously the definition of classic varies from country to country, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Vehicle to vehicle. And for example, for motorcycles, it's interesting because the process of legalization actually has to undergo 2 inspections. And one of those inspections is a noise inspection that is done in a massive field or in an airport or something like that. Really?
Because, of course, we don't have noisy motorcycles in Portugal, do we? No, hold on. Right, okay. So last words here as we conclude the recording, Rosanna. Is there anything else that kind of must know information at this point?
Let me check here. I think we've covered pretty much everything in terms of tips and things to have in mind when you're bringing your car. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. And of course, you can be found in Expats Portugal's business directory, expatsportugal.com, and people can find you, Rossana Veglia, Chief Mobility Officer at Global International Relocation, also known as GIR. Thank you so far. Excellent. And we'll go to a few more of the more personal questions now and end the recording right there. Thank you very much.